everyone know who Liberace was before he was?
Nope.
Okay, I didn't know. So I watched a video on
Okay.
YouTube.
Well,
It's very instructive.
Welcome to the last seminar before the first semester ends. And before I actually begin what we're going to do today, I would like to make a plangent yawp. What in the world is that? You might want to look it up while I'm talking, as long as you pay attention. Plangent yawp. Two of my great mentors, I have many, but there are a couple that are right at the top. One of them is Dave Hickey. The other one I won't mention. But Dave Hickey has had such a dramatic influence on my life as a teacher and hopefully as some kind of performing or strike the word performing, some kind of artist, musical artist. And I want to talk a little bit about Hickey's concept of negative freedom. And then one of my other mentors has a phrase that says, freedom is the first and the last step. That sounds like a guru-ish statement, but it's a profound one, and it ties in directly with Professor Hickey's negative freedom concept. So before I start talking about that, I just want to issue my plangent yawp about the function and the purpose, if there is one, of what I do in this room and have done for maybe the past, since I was made ruler overall in 1990, and that lasted for about 10 years. So, and I still continue to do that. This is a program for select people, not selected people, but select people who have the intelligence, the motivation, and the maturity to face principal issues concerning life as an artist without prejudice or without judgment. I assume that this is a college classroom, and I assume that there's a level of maturity, openness, and willingness to participate in this. I think that we need to be in this classroom mature enough to be able to discuss issues without resorting to some kind of moral high ground. Although essentially, in the end, that's exactly what happens. Hopefully, that will emerge something that is true and just. That's not a combination of things that are either proscribed or prescribed. This classroom is an opportunity for discussion, open and free. And we discuss topics in here that do have a kind of cushion around them. And in some cases, a red circle with a slash through them, like they're taboo topics. Well, I don't believe in that. And I certainly believe that my college classroom and this particular program is a forum where we're able to discuss any kind of issue, particularly as it relates to how you think and how you act, both as a human being and as an artist. Now, in the 1990s, I started using the term artist, and I was roundly criticized for that and told that, no, Curtis is not a place where you train artists. It is geared towards training performers. And my retort was, well, what is the definition of performance? Doesn't it mean to put form into something? Yes, well, that is the role of an artist who plays other people's music. And it's not like a painting where you are engaged in it indirectly. but you are the medium through which the musical work of art is produced or communicated. And so performance is a part of artistry, but it has nothing really to do with artistry. Artistry is something totally different. It has something to do with you personally and your attitude towards art and to life. Well, we've got that straightened out. So, I don't solicit people for this class. There's a specific reason why there is no credit given. You do get credit for it, but I still think it doesn't count towards graduation, does it? Maybe it does. Should. But I refuse any kind of attendance policy, and I refuse to give grades. I think that's for kindergarten or elementary school. It is not for a situation between adults, and that is what you are in here. And so I don't have any kind of constraints on attendance, nor do I evaluate you on the profound information that we try to discuss in here. I think that's ludicrous, and I think it's insulting, and I think it is unnecessary. And I do not depend on those kinds of barometers or rulers to judge whether you are learning something or not. That is your responsibility. And I respect you. No, strike the word respect. I honor you enough that you understand what the premise is behind what we do in here, in the hopes that you will become responsible enough for yourself to learn and to think and to grow according to how you want to, right? Now, that relates directly to a concept of Mr. Hickey. He has this kind of weird notion of two types of freedom. And as you'll find out, and already have found out, usually when he says something, it doesn't really mean what it looks like it means on the surface. And he has these two terms. He says that there is positive freedom and there is negative freedom. Well, you would think that the positive freedom is the good one and the negative freedom is the bad one. Well, it really is absolutely the reverse. And it has to do with his lifelong experience and convoluted experience in being in contact with young artists and being a teacher of young artists. He's highly critical of the educational system, higher academic institutions that try to teach art. And I would assume that an institution like this one, not isolated, but among others, falls under that category. And he believes that the two types of freedom, one is a type of prescriptive freedom, where you're given these opportunities to be the best that you can be. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, it's somebody's idea of what the best is for you. Now, in certain circumstances, I agree with that, right? However, an artist cannot possibly operate that way. An artist has to operate in the world of negative freedom. And that is, what do you think negative freedom means? Yes, it means giving you the opportunity to do the work. That's exactly what that means. And so it is a type of freedom that does not proscribe. What in the world does proscribe mean? I've been using that word for the past week. It just popped into my mind, from the college boards in like 1840. What does proscribe mean?
To tell somebody what to do? Or
what not to do.
Oh, okay.
Forbid, especially by law.
Yeah, right. Okay. So either prescription or proscription is not part of negative freedom. The negative freedom is to allow you to do what you need to do or want to do with no interference in the form of positive freedom. Now, people say, oh, well, you need guidance. Okay, well, I think guidance systems belong on 747s, right? Or maybe in kindergarten or elementary school. I'm not talking about that. This classroom is a place where I assume that there's a level of maturity where you don't need that kind of guidance. And the topics that we discuss in here, well, you should be able to listen without judgment. And maybe in that environment, you can actually pay attention to what it is that you're thinking about. And you see your own thoughts. And through that circumstance, and being in a mirror of relationship with the other people in this class, and with me, and I'm just, one of the ordinary people in the class. I would say ordinary guys, but I think I'd get called on the carpet for that. But just an ordinary person. I'm not an authority. I'm someone here that is facilitating the topics. And yes, it is the Musical Studies Advanced Seminar in Musical Studies and Independent Tutorial. They don't like that word either. Right? And so I design aspects of the curriculum. But it's not put in stone, and there's no syllabus that says we're going to do this on this day. I hand out the syllabus at the end of the year, right? So it can look good. So I can say, yeah, this is what we did, right? It was exactly what we planned to do. That's a joke. But at any rate, okay. So then the other statement, are we all clear about that? You may think these things are trivial, but I think they're eminently non-trivial. You understand? Is it clear what I'm talking about? Okay, you can read between the lines here. Okay. The other thing is, the other statement, freedom is the first step, not the last. What on earth does that mean? Well, it relates to the negative freedom idea, does it not? That you must be free in order to see. Oh, I like that. That rhymes. Let's make a slogan out of it. Someone suggests that I have either red or blue hats that says "Make music great again."
Maybe not that slogan.
Right? Why is that? What is freedom anyway? If you haven't learned that by now, you haven't listened to anything that I've said. What is freedom?
I can answer in a tautology.
What?
It's like being free to do whatever you want.
Well, that's a very dangerous statement, but actually, as an artist, that's actually what has to happen. To be free to do what you want, right? Now, that has to have some kind of qualification to it. But, so why is freedom the first step and not the last step? What is meant by that? The microphone is open.
Freedom gives independence, and without independence, you can't really do anything that's unique.
You have to call on me.
Yes.
Okay? Well, you're telling me what it does. You're not telling me what it is.
If freedom is the last step, then were you free at all?
Well, that's what that implies, is it not? Okay? Well, so what is freedom?
I guess what I mean is that freedom is independence.
Well, yes, it is, okay? But independence from what? tyranny, okay, slavery.
What we think it should be. It's like an ability to make decisions uninhibited of what's going on around you. Or
Well, those are magic words. What it should be. And where does the concept of what it should be, where does that come from?
Prescription.
Knowing what's out there, possible.
We've talked about this a number of different times. Where does that come from? My holiday hope is that you actually hear this. And I mean it seriously. So what is meant by that? What it should be? Where does that come from? Everyone has, the conflict between what is and what should be. I am this today, but I'm going to be that tomorrow. I am violent today, but tomorrow I'll be nonviolent. I am imperfect today, but tomorrow I will be less imperfect or non-imperfect. Where does that come from?
Expectations.
And where does the expectation come from?
Well, they can be our own, but they can also be like sort of imposed on us by other people. In which case, we're not experiencing freedom if we feel.
Oh, imposition.
Yeah,
What is,
if we feel bound. To
yeah, okay.
experience.
Well, what is imposition?
It can be a lot of things.
No, imposition is a part of what? The big V word. This is good. Very good. Begins with a V. And has a musical instrument.
Violation.
What?
Violation.
Violence. Yes. That was supposed to be a musical joke. Violence means to impose on someone else. So both prescription and proscription could be forms of violence. Are you, as a human being and your own self, violent?
is this a trick question?
It's a trick. Of course, it's a trick question.
By what definition?
What?
By what definition?
Don't you need something?
Well, is there something inside of you that's imposing a particular mode of behavior?
Yes.
You have thoughts and opinions, so probably.
Oh, right, okay. Well, once again, the organist 15, the rest of the class 2. Okay, no, that's a judgment right now. Wow.
That's violent.
Well, organist, so. Well, so thoughts and a.
Just gonna mute my computer real quick.
Thoughts and opinions are a product of you, yes. And how do they get their thoughts and opinions?
By synthesizing what we've experienced.
Sometimes.
Well, wait a minute. That's incorrect.
Well, often the ones.
Wait a minute. We got to correct that. Synthesizing experience. What is experience? Is the experience out there, or is the experience something that you create?
The experience is how you live it in your head, not what's actually out there.
Yes, you create the experience. There's not an experience, something out there that says, I am experience, and it comes into you. There's sensory input from all different kinds of sources, whether it's coming out of the mouth of another human being, or a loudspeaker, or a television. I guess you can say television. So what does that constitute? Experience then is something you manufacture, and it becomes part of what? Who you are, or who you think that you are. Yes? We've been through this many, many times. So then let's go back. Freedom is the first step. What is that step? What does it have to be?
Regards to what?
What we've been saying.
Does it have to be internal? You have to grant yourself freedom.
And how do you do that?
You remove the filter of what you think it should be when you perceive.
And what is that filter?
Judgment,
Like
preconceived ideas.
And where does that come from?
thought.
Imposition.
Well, I
Violence.
think
It comes from thought, right? But it comes from thought in the form of a rigid structure.
Yeah.
Which is what? What?
Your brain.
Yes, but what is that rigid structure? The brain is not really a rigid structure. It's usually referred to in neuroscience as a wetware. What an awful expression.
Consciousness.
Oh, yeah. And it comes from the I, yes? The self. The self is a constructed entity. And it's put together from a variety of sensory input. Some of things that do have a connection with things that are external to the mind, but most of them are not. At any rate, percepts are really internal to your mind. A tree, the image of a tree doesn't burn itself into your mind. It's manufactured symbolically. They're percepts. They're percepts that do have a relative correspondence with things in the world. Those are objects. But then there are things that have a concept that's only internal, the psychological concepts, psychological, mental concepts that define many aspects of who you actually are. And we've been through this many times before, that I have a suspicion that because of the nature of human mental capacity, that every aspect is somehow interpreted in an abstract manner. If one is, then all of them have to be. Even instincts, like hunger, the desire to continue through procreative acts, all of those things. In the human brain, or in the human mind, they become these abstract psychological entities, and they are assembled as though they were actual. And it is my opinion that, with a fair amount of evidence, that that is the source of all of the conflict in the world. And hence, if you want to be free, the first step is to what?
Separate the psychological concepts from the percepts that are related to.
So what does that mean after you separate them, if you can? One of the problems in human mental structure is that they become so intertwined that it's impossible to do that. Almost impossible to do that. This is one of the connections to Thais, the poor Cenobite monk who was lost in the pursuit, the ideal of perfection and serenity and eternal continuity and bliss and peace, right? Subjected himself to removal from the world and all kinds of techniques to suppress or to eliminate or eradicate all influences from the world. It's usually expressed as abnegation of the flesh. The flesh is not essentially bodily, but it is all of those psychological constructions that constitute the material influences. Are you following me on this? Right. So you have that, and that is one strategy, to suppress, to find a system whereby the influences of the world are canceled out through suppression, through abnegation, through a life as a blank out of all these sensations. And in Thais, what happens? The monk tries to convince Thais that she has to abandon her life of sensual experience and the pursuit of perpetual beauty, right, which is rooted to sensation, right, and follow this concept of abnegation, and in it she will find eternal life. Well, Thais gets that mixed up. Her own psyche gets mixed up in it. And she latches onto the word eternal. And she doesn't notice that the word beauty is not an essential part of that. It might be the beauty of the bride of Jesus or whatever it is, and that kind of eternal beauty and bliss. But what she's after is eternal physical beauty. And so she latches on to that idea that, oh, this is going to change her life. It's going to allow her to continue in eternity. So, what is going on in both of those cases? I know my stepson said, why do you do things like this? Can't you just get up in the morning, eat breakfast, and go on? And my answer to that is, well, no.
How do you do it?
I think it's like the act of what one is doing should be self-sustaining and self-fulfilling without an expectation to get something out of it that's detached from you. Like, it needs to be organically grown within oneself, like what you do.
Well, if the world were like that, there would be no need for either punishment or reward. I went over that with you yesterday. It's the world of dichotomies, or the world of contradictions. Where does that come from? It's naturally built into the process of thought, psychological thought.
Well,
I am this way, but you're that way. I want to be this way, but you're that way. And it can be either positive or negative, right? I attract these positive attributes to me, yet I see you in a negative way, and that also reinforces me positively. I'm not like that. Are we beginning to make any progress on this?
I think being free, not in an abstract way, but as it pertains to the world and society where there is structure and rules, and is being able to mind fuck yourself, convince yourself, or be able to shift the ability to shift your mindset creates a lot of freedom, because then when one is able to, I think being stuck in one way of thinking or persistence in one way is very inhibiting. It's not freedom, because you can operate with freedom even when you're not free. Like to do
Isn't
it.
that the difference between positive freedom and negative freedom? One of the attributes. But how do you become free?
Well, the rigid structure you said that has to go away.
Mhm.
Is that the self? Are we talking about that?
Yeah.
I'm trying to track this so we don't just leave this open-ended.
Well, it's got to always be open. The thing is that that's one thing I don't like to do is come to conclusions, right?
That's fine.
It's your responsibility, not you personally.
Right.
It's the individual's responsibility to hold these things up. In a certain sense, this class is an entertainment, right?
But you said, I really want you all to hear this, but we never actually got to that punchline.
Well,
So that's what I'm
everything
waiting
is
for.
being said.
Okay.
Well,
So,
Well, that's a deep subject.
think on.
So yes, the rigid structure is the self, or properties of the self. Well, the next question, the next statement should be: are you telling me that we could go around without the concept of a self?
I don't think that's possible.
What do you think my answer to that would be? No.
There's absolutely no way.
No,
like,
absolutely.
It's solipsistic.
There's a given way in which your brain operates that is identical to everyone's brain, unless there's some kind of pathological situation that, keeps it from functioning normally, whatever that means.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you if you're
No,
in
no.
mid-thought, but like going back to the opera, isn't that kind of doesn't the what's his name, Nathaniel, like he's like trying to like be all aesthetic, but doesn't he like in the end isn't he like overcome by his like sensual desires or whatever? So isn't that kind of just an example of like how when you try to repress certain things, it doesn't it doesn't like you can't ever like get rid of certain things fully. I'm not like
Yeah, but isn't the desire, there we are, that word, that desire to have this state of abnegation or bliss or whatever you want to call it, isn't that a psychological construction?
maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Well, if it's not, what is it? Don't use the D word. Don't say, well, it's just an inner desire. Well, that would be the retort, I think.
What about dream?
Dream?
Well, like, is dreaming a form of negative or an expectation? I mean, of course, how does one, without ideals, how does one move forward?
Well, you move forward with no ideals.
Well, moving forward, if you want to change something about the world, or if you want to,
But wait a minute, listen at that statement. If you want to change something, right? What does that mean? That something is one way, and you're going to think of another way, which is the opposite of that. What would happen if you actually saw what was this way you wanted to get rid of? Suppose you suspend in some manner, right? What if you were to actually see through what this thing is? What would happen?
I think that
What would happen?
You would realize that like the problem is in your own desires and not the situation of whatever you think needs to be changed. I'm just thinking about like this isn't always the case, but a lot of like well-meaning people that want to help like those who are underprivileged or whatever, and it turns into something that's much more about like them than about the people they want to actually like serve, who are like of a minority or poor or whatever.
Yeah,
That's only
well,
one
I
example,
have
but-
I have broached that idea
Yeah.
many times in the seminar, and it's like planting like they do in Star Trek, a cold fusion bomb in the class,
But
and there's like this.
But because being an artist is about, or because everything comes from our own experience. Like as an artist, what you're actually doing is inspiring others or enabling others to create their own experience, like their own. So
Why would you want to do that?
well, because if you're saying that creating that all of our experience, there's not an experience that's created within.
You create the experience.
Yeah, then if we play a piece of music for people, we're not giving them an experience. We're enabling them to create an experience for themselves, or coaxing them into with helping them or inspiring them to like create their own experience.
Well, you can't help someone if you expect them to do it on their own. So you're not helping. This is a big point, and I'm glad it's brought up.
What about facilitating? That's kind of a
Oh,
long one, but, like,
okay,
you're
well,
making it
I
possible
don't even
for
know
people
about
to do
that.
helping them.
Okay, but do you know anything about Jackson Pollock? How many paintings did he do? Untold numbers. And many of them, he would paint them, and then he would throw them in the trash can. How many pieces did Franz Joseph Haydn write or compose?
I don't even know.
Many pieces.
Probably
How
don't
many
know.
pieces did poor Mozart write? He lived about a third as long as Haydn. Wasn't Haydn like 800 years old when he died?
It's like 80 years old.
Didn't he make it into the 19th century?
72, 77 years old. What do you got?
In 1813.
626K numbers.
What?
626K numbers.
Oh, Mozart, yes. About 600 plus compositions. Well, I would dare say, although I don't know the exact number, Haydn is, much larger than that. Do you think Haydn, each evening when he retired to his boudoir or his apartment with his, unsuccessful marriage, he cloistered himself into this room with a nice glass of wine and, and opened the scores of all the works he had done and looked at them and say, oh, wow, this is really good. I enjoy it. This means a great deal to me.
Yeah.
There isn't a single artist worth their salt that does that. That's a very contemporary idea. And so consequently, you have artists explaining their compositions or telling you what they're about. That immediately takes the responsibility away from the other person. That is a perversion, in my opinion. The work of art exists. You let the work of art do that work, not you. I know that's harsh, but it's true. Very true. What kind of work did the St. John Passion do? Yes, Bach revised it several times. Yes? That's not quite the same thing. Look at Handel's Messiah. I mean, we're at that time of the year, where everybody and everybody's brother does that work. And, it's like this, the Messiah, right? Do you know how that was put together? And just think. Who wrote it? Handel, just in a matter of 25 seconds, put that large 3.5-hour piece of music together. What a genius. Then you come to find out that at least half of it appears in other oratorios or operas. Most of them are like opera arias or duets or whatever. Very little of that is originally composed with that kind of grandiose idea in mind. I'm sorry, but that is the truth. That does not take away the impact that that piece had on people. But Handel was not concerned about that. Well, maybe he was, because he was extremely wealthy. And didn't he own a printing monopoly in London?
Maybe.
He did.
Surprised me.
He did. Handel was a very shrewd man. He was also, well, what I'm trying to say is that nothing.
Well, you let the art do the talking, but the art is you. I mean, the art doesn't.
How is it you?
Because it's. I mean, there's no way that it's not. Art's human.
Yeah, but you're not there to, this is one thing also that David Hickey says in numbers of places. He says, the painting is hanging on the wall, and you're there looking at the painting, right? Where is the artist, assuming it's a contemporary artist? Is the artist standing next to the painting, facing you, saying, this is me, or this is I, whatever? Or is the artist standing with you, looking at the painting?
Yeah, definitely the second one, but.
Yes, of course. Of course. However, as Angelica Morales said to me, reaching over, putting her aged hand on my youthful hand, my dear, but Beethoven is not here. I mean, I've told that story too many times, and I thought it was ridiculous at the time. But in my, accelerated youth, I find that that's incredibly insightful. So I agree with you, when you create a work of art, right? You did it, yeah? But the thing is, you send it out there.
Yeah, well, it's you, but it's not you in that moment. It's not you. Yeah, it's the juxtaposition between it being you, but it's not you at all. But otherwise we would.
But in music, you see, there's a caveat. There's a trip up there, because in music, it's got to follow a line of transformation, or it goes from the artist or from the mind, and it is channeled through the artist.
Is it possible that it is both you and the art when it's music, because it is performance?
So that's what I'm trying to say. It's fine, you said it.
I think
So
Monica wants to say something.
cut me off. What? Yes.
So I think what you're suggesting is that too often we start with the work of art, and we use like the constructs that are floating around and create that thing, but we need to sort of take a step back and view everything with a broader lens and greater objectivity, so that when we finally produce the art, yes, it says something, but it's not what other people told us it should say.
Well, yeah.
So it's still us, but because we approached it in a more objective and open way.
Well, how do you approach it in an open way? There's a cover to a book by philosopher Daniel Dennett, and it has to do with the mind, and it's a Hirschberg thing, and it's a guy looking at a painting, and there's the balloon, and they're like a multitude of symbols, and he's trying to figure out what that might mean. Well, embedded in that, or people talking about the painting or the work of art and saying it should be this way, it should be that way, and all that. But that's embedded in the whole collection of thought that we bring to a work of art. Suppose you didn't do that. Suppose you approached a work of art, and this is particularly true of musicians who have to be in that kind of chain of command unless you're an improviser. But of course, Mozart wasn't, and Beethoven certainly was not, and Brahms certainly was not. Improvisation does not really play a significant role in musical art. Right. Wrong. So, if you can approach the, work of art as though you've never seen it before, and approach it that way all the time, and not fall into the trap as, if you listen to so-and-so play this, it should be played like that. Now, I'm not saying a whole bunch of things that you can obviously draw conclusions from.
As a musician, you kind of, I feel like, just let the music affect me or speak to me, there's it's like a conversation. Well, I don't know, you just, I don't know, when you work on a piece of music that you didn't write, you just let it affect you and you feel, and then that's what it is.
Well, in that way, that's the only way in which the term interpretation has a validity to it. And you see that's not exactly the same thing in dramatic art or in visual art. What does the word interpretation mean? It means to stand between, does it not? Right, so it is particularly important for a performer who's putting form into a work of art. You do that anyway when you have an encounter, I hate that word, with a painting or a dramatic or a piece of literature or whatever. Right? It becomes your responsibility to be the interpreter in that stage. But in music performance, it's particularly important because you're the ones that's standing between the created work and the experience of that work by a listener. Yes? And so what do you bring to that? Do you bring to that work a collection of psychic phenomena that Professor X has said and Professor Y or Recording Z has brought to it? Well, I don't know, maybe you respond internally to something like that, but essentially, it's got to strike something in you that you can convey. How do you do that? It's one of the reasons why I always hated playing the same program over and over and over and over again. One of the reasons why I quit playing. I cannot bear that. And so I tried to figure out a way where, you play all this music and then it kind of rotates. And maybe you could get on a schedule where you didn't repeat something unless it was like in a 10-year cycle or something like that. But then I figured out, if you play the complete works of Bach, you'd have to be 900 years old before that kind of cycling took place. Okay, that's enough of that. Well, all right, well, let's just tie up the Thais thing. And so what is the irony in Thais? You were almost at that point of getting something really significant.
Role reversal.
What?
The role reversal?
Well, there's a role reversal, but in essence, both Thais and, what's his name? And not Nathaniel. Right. Both of them were caught in the same trap. Yeah? So the irony is not just the reversal of their attitudes, but the fact that both of them were caught in the same situation. Now, whether Massenet or what's his name that did the libretto, whether they were really aware of that is irrelevant. But that is built into that opera. And it's the thing that hit me while watching that particular performance. Right.
Was Thais, was she caught in the trap because of the misunderstanding you said earlier about like eternal life that she thought meant eternal beauty?
Yes.
Okay.
But then what happens at the end with Thais?
She dies.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's symbolic, I think. She actually dies to what? Not the physical death.
What's it called? The thing that existentialists call it.
Don't bring up that term. What kind of death?
Dead to himself?
Yes, it's a psychological death. And I do believe that you're communicated or it is tried to, I think they're trying to make it apparent that her transformation is really a profound transformation. Whereas the suppressive effort at transformation completely fails. And you're brought back to what actually is. Okay. All right. Are you with me? All right. I feel that you know how I feel about concepts or basic ideas in morality. I think that morality is within, is the animal world moral?
No.
No. Mark Hauser, bless his heart, he cheated on an experiment at Harvard and they threw him out. But he was an extremely smart man. And there's a book of his that's called The Moral Animal. And it's a book about, is morality an intrinsic property of the human being? Well, I mean, there are people like Dewey and John Stuart Mill that, of course, actually felt that. And there are others, right? That human beings do have a moral sense, but it's often clouded by various and sundry conflicting notions of the self. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I happen to believe that it is true. However, morality is not the morality of society. It is not the morality of any one particular group, or fashion, or fad, or revolution. The major principle of morality is what, for lack of a better term, is the notion of grace, unmerited favor. You see it represented in works of art as diverse as A Simple Heart by Flaubert. And you also see it at work, in my opinion, in something like the Ring Cycle. Brunhilde is a messenger of grace. And that always implies a kind of innocence. It implies a kind of unawareness. That's what unmerited favor actually is. And throughout history, there have always been efforts to either suppress or proscribe or prescribe. The rash of dystopian movies and novels and books that have come out recently is like amazing. What are some of them? There's Veronica Roth's trilogy. What is it? Insurgent, Divergent. What's the other one? There are three of them, right? That's a dystopian society where, you know, the world has come to some kind of cataclysm. And interestingly enough, it's set in Chicago. Imagine that. Okay? And so the world is reorganized according to factions. You know, there is abnegation, there is amity, there is erudite, there's, you know, all these things. And you choose, once you choose your faction, you stay in it, and, you know, the world is supposed to be perfect. Okay, then there was, all of these books are actually written for, like, teenagers. They have absolutely no effect on anything. But then there's the one called The Giver. That was written by some woman, and it's turned into a movie. And that's a dystopian thing. And that is actually a little closer to contemporary society, because at every turn, you know, you can't speak freely, right? The parents always say, precision of language. So there are certain things that you can say, and there are other things that you can't say. Right? So that's a dystopian society. And so it turns out in that particular one, everyone is so medicated to think in exactly the same way. And, you know, it's a Hollywood trick. The film is done in black and white, and then the person who has this kind of, the giver who has this awakening, sees things in color. It's actually an amazing film. All right, and then what's another one? I mean, there were the
Hunger Games.
Yeah.
The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
That's my favorite, right? What is her name? Katniss, right? And yeah, and who plays the president? Donald Sutherland. He's like A+, you know, with his like obsequiousness and his underlying, you know, totalitarian mode and his obsession with white roses. You know, what a series. It's very, very long. But those are all dystopian solutions to, you know, the problem of morality. And no one, even as banal as those things are, and as commercial and widespread as they are, what kind of effect do you think they have on anybody? Except, you know, regurgitatory responses. No, no, nothing, right? So, you know, it's like that commercial to the first Alien movie, right, which I saw at midnight in 1970-something, right? This big, you know, thing in this egg, you know, where the alien comes out. It was in Times Square, and it says, "This is a warning," right? You know what I'm talking about? You don't even, you know, who Ridley Scott is, right? Well, this is a warning, right? And I mean that in all dead seriousness. Okay, here we go. All right, let's look at this this essay by Hickey. And I find it challenging, humorous, and profoundly serious. Okay, and this essay is entitled "The Rhinestone as Big as the Ritz." Now, knowing the kind of genius of Mr. Hickey, this is a literary, some kind of literary allusion. Do you have any idea what this refers to?
Only the rhinestone part.
Really? It's how many of you read a lot of Scott Fitzgerald? It's one of my all-time idols. Not the two movies of The Great Gatsby, but the book, The Great Gatsby. The two current movies.
Yeah.
I thought there was
I mean, recent movies. One of them was with Mia Farrow and
Yeah.
Robert Redford, and the other one is with Leonardo decapitated, and I don't know who else, right? Not those, but the book itself, right, is a classic. And Scott Fitzgerald is like an amazing figure. And speaking of that, have you read Hemingway's Movable Feast? Those stories? One of the big, it's almost a novella, not quite. And it's Hemingway's recounting of his lifelong friendship with Scott Fitzgerald. And really, really fascinating film. Also, there's another film recently with the inimitable, what's that English actor? Oh, God. Jude Law, right? Called Genius. And it's about another author, Thomas Wolfe. And there's an encounter in that with Scott Fitzgerald also. So this is a reference to a short story by Fitzgerald called A Diamond as Big as the Ritz. Okay. All right. Balcony of My Apartment. Did you all read this?
Yeah.
That is the most amazing thing in the world. Okay, I'm going to read the first paragraph and then we're going to start talking. The balcony of my apartment faces west towards the mountains, overlooking the Las Vegas Strip. So, every evening when the sky is not overcast, a few minutes after the sun has gone down, the mountains turn black. The sky above them turns this radical plum rouge, and the neon logos of the Desert Inn, the Stardust, the Circus Circus, the Riviera, the Las Vegas Hilton, and Vegas World blaze forth against the Black Mountains. And every night I find myself struck by the fact that while the Strip always glitters with a reckless and undeniable specificity against the darkness, the sunset, smoldering out above the mountains, every night and without exception, looks bogus as hell. It's spectacular, of course, and even occasionally sublime, if you like sublime. But to my eyes, that sunset is always fake, as flat and gaudy as a Barnett Newman, and just as pretentious. Now, the first thing you probably did was to run to your computer or your handheld digital device and put who is Barnett Newman so you could find out what the reference is. Did you do that? No. Why?
No.
This is why the Evelyn Wood speed reading course is absolutely no help in things of literary import. Because there are always going to be things in the literature that makes these references hysterical or historical references to the symbols of culture. And you have to look at them, otherwise it doesn't mean anything. It was Barnett Newman. He's an artist. He comes from a period that I think is actually pretty unique in American art, from which I don't think we've actually escaped. And it's also unique in American music, which that period has all been thrown in the trash can. Are you looking at who Barnett Newman was? Do you look at one of his paintings? You're not looking?
I'm looking.
I think it'd be important to look at one of his paintings. Do you know who it
I've
is?
seen a lot. Yeah. I'm
You've seen
surprised
one,
how
I've seen them all.
Abstract expressionist.
Well, if you want to call him that, he's a contemporary of, name two other people that he's a contemporary of.
Mark Rothko.
Mark Rothko. Yeah, we did a thing on Mark Rothko about 40 years ago, about 5 years ago. Weren't you in the class when we did that? 4 years ago?
I don't think so.
Rothko was the
I was here
artist.
before.
It looks like Rothko.
Yeah, a little bit, except it goes in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So, and we could go off on a tangent here and start talking about, the comparison between Rothko and Newman. I'll ask you, since you seem to, do you know any works of Rothko? Yeah. What would you say that the difference is between those two?
Visually, or
Well, Hickey is saying that they look flat and pretentious.
well, they are more static, I guess.
Than
Rothko.
right. The Rothko paintings have a kind of luminescence, or they almost like vibrate, and it's because of the suggestion of the spaces and the color spaces, and the fact that the paint is put on in all of these different layers, and you see this kind of radiating or vibrating effect. You have to stand in front of the painting for a while. And of course, Rothko is standing with you. He's not standing next to the painting. Although both Barnett, Newman, and Rothko were very vocal about art in general. You read any of the philosophical works of Rothko? Life as an Artist? Oh, the life and work of an artist? Interesting. Okay. Well, at any rate, to him they look flat and pretentious. Right? Friends of mine who visit watch this light show with different eyes. They prefer the page of the landscape to the text of the neon. They seem to think it's more authentic. I, on the other hand, suspect that authenticity is altogether elsewhere, that they are responding to nature's ability to mimic the sincerity of a painting, that the question of the sunset and the strip is more a matter of one's taste and duplicity. One either prefers the honest fakery of the neon or the fake honesty of the sunset. The undisguised artist of culture, or the cultural construction of authenticity, the genuine rhinestone, finally, or the imitation pearl. Herein I take my text for the tragicomedy of Liberace and the anomaly of his amazing museum. Have you ever been to Las Vegas? Right? Okay. I've been caught in Las Vegas many, many times. I'm ensnared in Las Vegas. That goes back